There's nothing like having the right tool to do the job. And when the tool turns out to be something very simple, it even makes the job more enjoyable. Who would have imagined that a very simple and inexpensive curved tip syringe could do such a great job on the area of preventative maintenance on an old Benz? You cannot believe how many problems I've seen over the years that have been caused by lack of lubrication. We're talking about sunroof failure. We're talking about hood hinge failure. We're talking about door check strap failure. We're talking about window regulator failure. Power seat tracks, power window motors, and it goes on and on and on. Linkages seizing in the engine compartment, hoods jamming and it can't open. All of these things could have been prevented by some consistent preventative lubrication of the key components in each one of those situations. So what I've come up with right here is what I call my little first aid preventative medical kit for Mercedes-Benz. And it's a set of syringes with special lubrication in them that will allow me to lubricate easily. I mean, this is almost fun. Those key parts on a Mercedes to help prevent failure in the future. Let me show you each one of these in detail now. These 4 syringes contain the 4 most common lubricants that I use when working on an old car. This first one here contains automatic transmission fluid. Now, automatic transmission fluid is an ideal lubricant where you need good wicking and where you want it to hold in position. Now, later on, I'll show you where I use automatic transmission fluid. The second one contains Mercedes factory sunroof grease. And let me tell you, if you do not lube the tracks and mechanism in your sunroofs, you're going to have some very expensive problems in the future. The fourth contains a high content moly grease, and this one I use for window regulators, door checks, and other areas like the hood latch assembly that needs a nice heavy grease. And then finally, this one is a low odor, clear, synthetic grease that I use on the seat tracks. And it has excellent properties for both power and manual seat track assemblies. And you can take and modify. If you notice, the tip on this one is very fine. I don't need to modify the tip because this is a very thin oil in this syringe. And of course, the other syringes, I have to cut the tip to get just the right size hole I will need to apply the grease where I want it. Let me take you now and show you the specific examples of where I use these greases. Automatic transmission fluid is an ideal lubricant for all these ball sockets on the linkages on an automotive engine. And there's a lot of these on a Mercedes diesel. But imagine trying to get down into these ball sockets and lubricating them without having to disassemble them. Well, using this curved tip syringe, I can come in right here underneath and just lube each one of these ball sockets right from the back side here. And I don't need a lot of oil, just a few drops. You need to do this on a regular basis. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. You can even get into these pivot points. Now these pivot points, if they're neglected, will cause jamming of the linkage, and this can be real scary on these old cars. If you have your throttle jammed wide open, it's usually because these pivot points have not been lubricated. So you can see how even lubricating linkages becomes an enjoyable job with this little clever tool right here. I also use this to lubricate hood hinges on these old Mercedes, and that's very important as well. I like to use this black moly grease where I want a real thick grease that has some really strong holding power, particularly in areas that might be subject to rainwater. I use this around the areas like this hood latch. You can take and put a little on your finger here and wipe it if you want. You notice how you can control the amount. I use this grease in all the latches for the doors and also on any of the window regulators. Of course, that means removing the door panel, but that's really the only good way to lubricate window regulators and door check straps. Over the years, I've lubricated a lot of sunroof tracks, and it can be very frustrating. I've tried acid brushes, Q-tips, bent coffee stirring sticks or whatever. I think The original idea for the use of this curved syringe came out of the frustration of trying to lubricate these tracks. You've got to get down in underneath here in this groove and put a nice bead in there. You don't want a lot of grease, because you get too much grease, it's going to collect, a lot of dirt and grime, but you want just enough grease that it's going to lubricate those track slides and keep the sunroof from jamming. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, what about the difficulty of lubricating all those angular arm assemblies for the tilting roof? Well, that's coming soon. I'm currently working on a series of videos on how to clean and lubricate those tracks, as well as repairing broken ones. So keep an eye on that in the future. In the meantime, don't forget to lube your sunroof at least every 6 months. This clear synthetic grease is ideal for seat track assemblies. I like this because it has some of the same properties as your moly grease, but it's not as sticky, it doesn't collect as much dirt, and it goes on very easily and you don't notice it as much. Now, you notice this seat track is pretty dirty. I would normally clean this before I apply the grease, but for the expediency of this video, I'm just showing you how I can get this grease into the track assembly. So you'll have to work it down, move the seat all the way back, work it down in, then move the seat all the way forward and go to the back side and work the grease up as far as you can, and then work the seat back and forth. Do this once again periodically and you'll be amazed at how nice your seats work. If you want to cut maintenance costs, I highly recommend that you set up your own lubrication schedule on a 6 months to yearly basis. My kits will include tips and recommendations on how you should do this type of schedule.